Many of you know this, but this second face of power in our pro-LGBT religious movement would honestly be significantly weaker if it were not for Michael. Michael has been a laughing, driving, playful, faithful force from the beginning of the work that has become the Institute for Welcoming Resources. And I would most certainly not be here with you today in this capacity were it not for Michael. So thank you. Okay, just a couple more points and I'll sit down. The third face of power is the ability to mobilize folks. This can be in a single congregation during a more light process, or it can be in working in 187 Presbyterians, I don't know if I have that number right, in order to ratify ordination equality, or it can be in the collective planning and strategizing to be here at GA. Often we hear campaigns and we think only of secular political organizing. But the ability to inspire folks to collective action is what the Jesus movement is all about. And it is what our pro-LGBT religious justice movement is about too. As I said, all three of these faces of power relate to each other. Every campaign should be an opportunity to say again and again and again the world that we are envisioning. And campaigns, win or lose, should be an opportunity for us to build stronger and better organizations and relationships. And I think from what I've heard that the campaign to try and ratify the OAB stuff that happened a couple of years ago, in fact, is part of the reason that we are so strong and collective here together. It's a perfect example of how that can work. Besides the importance of the three faces of power to our individual and collective efforts, we've been strategizing about one other issue. In order to tell you about that, I think I need to tell you one more set of stories. So it's hard to know with Presbyterians. Are you with me still? There's a lot of silence. You're still here with me? All right, all right. I just came from MCC, you know. There's a lot of call and response, so I was getting adjusted. Do you, what's that? Okay, that's good. Thank you. When I was in the Jewish Movement Building meeting, they said, you know, if you don't interrupt me, I think you're bored. That's in the Jewish culture. Do you remember that television show in the 1970s called Little House on the Prairie? It was set here in Minnesota and South Dakota and chronicled the life of a young woman, Laura Ingalls Wilder, who was played by Melissa Gilbert. Well, one of those early telltale signs of my orientation was a huge crush on Laura Ingalls Wilder. I watched faithfully every week to see how my Shiro would tackle yet another daunting task of life on the prairie. In 1983, Melissa Gilbert starred in a made-for-TV movie entitled Choices of the Heart. Choices of the Heart told the story of Jean Donovan, who was one of the 4 U.S. churchwomen who was raped and murdered in El Salvador in 1980 by U.S.-backed Salvadoran death squads. That movie changed the course of my life. All of the admiration and love I felt for Melissa Gilbert as Laura Ingalls Wilder, I transferred to Jean Donovan. And it led me to read every single book I could find on her, biographies, books of Archbishop Oscar Romero, whose assassination 9 months before Jean's had greatly impacted her ministry. And I also read all about liberation theology from a Latin American context. Jean's life story and the subsequent consciousness I gained from the passion I felt for her led me to many things, including a trip as part of the accompaniment movement in El Salvador. My journey was to a village called Santa Marta. Now, Santa Marta had been one of those hit by the U.S. financed and supported Operation Phoenix, whose motto was, "The guerrillas are like the fish, the people are like the sea. if you dry up the sea, you can find the fish. In the early 1980s, Santa Marta had been a village of about 4,000. Operation Phoenix killed about 3,000 of these folks, and the remaining 1,000 fled to Honduras and lived there in a refugee camp for 4 years. In October of 1987, the survivors took diapers, towels, and anything else that was white and could be held up as a flag of peace and walked back into El Salvador to the place that had been their village. There they were joined by North Americans whose presence was meant to keep the Salvadoran army from killing the villagers, because the army didn't want the US population to be made aware of what was happening in El Salvador. They'd learned their lesson in 1980 when Jean Donovan and her 3 colleagues were killed. The US had cut off aid for a few months. I was part of the delegation that spent a week in Santa Marta over Christmas 1987. During that trip, I asked one of the women how it was that she was able to come back to El Salvador and protest the government and not be terrified. In her response, she said to me, "I have lost 5 children to this civil war. One of them, my oldest son, I witnessed being tortured to death. I have been able to survive because I know that in Jesus Christ, God knows in God's very body what it means to be tortured to death. So my son did not die alone, but instead being held in the arms of God. And in the resurrection, God has said once and for all that life and love are stronger than death. So it doesn't matter what they try to do to me. Even if they kill me, I know that God will resurrect me, and that makes me powerful." Now, I am a double PK. Both of my folks are pastors. And I have never heard a better sermon than that one that was spoken to me about the meaning of what God has done in Jesus Christ than from that powerful, fearless Salvadoran woman. And to her, I owe the debt of my faith. Her words taught me that faith is not something that is practiced once or twice a week as an optional activity, but is instead literally necessary for survival. Furthermore, faith is that which compels us to make the world more like God would have it to be, just and joyous and abundant. The experience of having a crush on Melissa Gilbert, which led me to a crush on Jean Donovan, which led me to the birth of my adult faith, has made me understand that my love of another person is connected to my love of their life circumstances, and that these are connected to my deep desire to make this kind of love and justice in the world. For me, desire and passion are deeply personal, but they have led me over and over again to desire and passion and love and justice out in the world. I share this with you because the final piece I want to leave with you is the reality that our movement for LGBT justice isn't only about LGBT people. Our movement, whose roots are in the foolishness of the cross and the doing of Tikkun Olam, calls us, cajoles us, and literally demands of us that we always recognize that LGBT justice is part of a larger movement of God's justice for all LGBT people who are of every race and gender and ability and economic class, and for all of creation. If someone doesn't have enough to eat, this is an LGBT issue.